All right. So thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Joan Lacqua, and I'm the executive director of the History Project. We are Boston's LGBTQ plus community archives. If you're not familiar with our work, I'm going to put a link to our website in the chat. But essentially, we document, preserve, and share LGBTQ plus history of Boston, Massachusetts, and we have collections from across New England. We do a lot of free public programming to share LGBTQ plus history. And coming up in the next month, in this month, we have tonight's event with Jackson. On Saturday, we will be holding a Wikipedia edit-a-thon about queer women of New England at the Jamaica Plain Public Library. Later on in the month, on the 27th, I believe, we're doing an event with Historic New England, unraveling the mystery of early 20th century female partnerships for Women's History Month. And then Jackson Island and I will be back again at the Tufts School of the Museum of Fine Arts for Queer Haunts, Playland film screening, and panel. So please keep up with what we're doing. We would love your support as well. You can make a donation to us online at historyproject.org/support, and I'll put that link in the chat too. All right. And tonight we are joined by Jackson Davidow. And Jackson, let me pull up your bio real quick. So Jackson is an art historian, curator, and critic. He's currently the John R. and Barbara Robinson Family Curatorial Fellow in Photography at the Harvard Art Museums. With Noam Parnas, he's the co-curator of Christian Walker, The Profane and the Poignant, which is on view at the Tufts University Art Galleries at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. And that is up in Boston through April 21st. Jackson's second exhibition, As the World Burns, Queer Photography and Nightlife in Boston, curated in partnership with Laurel V. McLaughlin, accompanies the Walker Survey during its presentation at the Tufts University Art Galleries. And we're so lucky to have you here tonight, Jackson, to talk about your exhibit and to share, to have a virtual gallery talk. And I will hand it over to you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Joan. And thank you, Sam and Tony. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with all of you throughout the past few years. The History Project has been such a vital resource for me in my research, and is really essential to preserving LGBTQ histories in Boston, New England, and beyond. I'm so grateful for all of your collective work and all of your collective support. I also want to point out that we are fortunate to be able to borrow various photographic materials and other publications from the History Project for this exhibition. So thank you for enabling that. And so many people who are represented within the exhibition to have strong connections to the History Project, including Craig Bailey and Pat Gozemba. So it's really been a community effort. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. And when Tony asked me to give a virtual gallery talk, I took that request rather literally. I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint with the installation photographs that are beautiful by Mel Tang. Let's see. Does that look good, Joan? Yeah, okay. And so you'll really get a sense of the space, how the works are appearing on the walls, how they're in dialogue with one another, the different synergies that exist across this project. You'll also get a sense of how the show connects to Christian Walker, The Profane and the Poignant, which again, I co-curated with Noam Parnas, and in many ways it served as the inspiration for this project. So As the World Burns examines the relationship between queerness and photography and nightlife in Boston, mainly from the 70s, in the 70s and 80s. But there are works that actually predate that and that come after. And essentially Boston in this period was an incredibly exciting hub of gay activism, politics, culture, publishing, nightlife. And it was also a really rich photography world, lots going on across these different domains, and specifically in relation to nightlife and sex. In this exhibition, I'm bringing together three different types of photographic practice that are rarely in dialogue with one another in art history or curatorial practice. So these are contexts of photographers who emerged from art schools and teaching in exhibition environments. So those who are very much participating in an art world. The second category is photographers operating within the gay press. So Fag Rag and Gay Community News and Bad Attitude, for example, were all really crucial platforms for publishing and for criticism, as well as for photography. And thirdly, I'm looking at the community archive as a space. So actually, almost all of these materials are borrowed from the History Project, and I'm interested in vernacular imagery. So works that are in the archive by people who are self-taught photographers, such as Pat Gozemba, such as Jim McGrath, who you'll hear more about shortly. And their work is absolutely marvelous, and I think really needs to be foregrounded in histories of photography in Boston. So this is one of the projects of the exhibition, and thinking about the ways in which the photographic really played a role in producing and consolidating LGBTQ identities during such a period of tumult and transformation in Boston, but also in the United States. And you will see, I think, these identities and narratives and images were so influential on a global scale, I would argue. So with that, I'm going to introduce these different parts of the exhibition. It's going to be a little bit of a whirlwind. I'm not going to have the ability to delve into everything, but I'll try my best to do it in about 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for conversation and questions. So this project in several ways actually was inspired by the work of Christian Walker, who was a Black gay artist who lived mainly in the South End and Fort Hill from about 1974 to 1984. He's someone that Noam, my collaborator who lives in New York, and I have been doing a lot of research on for several years. And this is a project called the Theater Project, in which he, in 1982, 83, he he was preoccupied with the combat zone, which is, as many of you know, the red light district, a legendary red light district in Boston. And the Pilgrim Theater was a place that played straight porn, but where a lot of men cruised and trans feminine individuals were there as well. So it was a place where people were looking for various forms of sex and intimacy and sustenance, a space of incredible sleaze, and one that is certainly missing from our cultural ecosystem today. There was another theater, the State Theater, that had a pretty similar profile. And he made this incredible series. Actually, while taking a photo class at the SMFA, he studied there in the early 80s and graduated with a degree in 1984. And this project really takes us through one's trajectory in the space. So I have some other images here. Going from the foyer all the way to the various balconies and the hallways, and then down in the basement where there are bathroom stalls. And the series concludes with, so this is another image, which is actually in the collection of Michael Bronski. Here it ends with The Kiss, which is just a gorgeous image of two Black men, one of whom we were actually able to connect with at the opening in New York, which was a pleasure. So Christian Walker is a fascinating character for so many reasons. One of them is that he operated kind of across so many different social and photographic worlds. He was really involved in, this art school context that I was telling you about. So mass art and the SMFA and various other arts schools and photography schools in the region were pumping out students, and he was part of that. He was also in many community darkrooms. But then he had close relationships with a lot of people who were active in gay organizing and publishing. And for example, he knew Charlie Shively pretty well. He socialized with the Fort Hill Faggots and actually made a series devoted to documenting its inhabitants and their boyfriends. Um, and then, so those kind of stand for the two first parts of the exhibition that I'll be showing you. But the third part about the vernacular, he wasn't really engaging with vernacular images during his time in Boston. But in 1984, he moved to Atlanta, and a lot of his work started to revolve around the family album and other forms of vernacular practice. And so for me, I was thinking about how to best uh, complement and texture Walker's really brilliant and important work that has been totally overlooked in histories of art and photography. And part of that had to do with his own unusual life story. Um, but I was using him as kind of a platform for rethinking a lot of histories of photography and nightlife in Boston. The exhibition itself is thinking about sex and nightlife in an expanded sense. So it's not just like going out, to a bar, but thinking about, for example, publishing a safe sex guide with erotic images. That could be a form of nightlife, or partying with your friends at home and experimenting, with being in drag, for example. That's a form of nightlife and sex for me. Or cruising, at the Playland, or at the State Theater, the Pilgrim Theater, or going to Playland, which is a bar we'll be talking about. As the World Burns is a film made by Mark Weiner, who was a film student at BU. He made this film in 1973, and it's really a remarkable historical document revolving around Bobby Busnatch, who was a sex worker and a self-taught photographer. And some of you might be familiar with the Facebook group devoted to the other side. And he was kind of the person who originated that and was really essential to creating that community online. I recently published an article in the Baffler that kind of details the history of that Facebook group. Excuse me. So the title of the exhibition takes its cue from this video. I thought it was kind of a captivating title on this video, as I hope you have the chance to see it. And if you look through the other side Facebook group, you'll find it on Facebook, or an edited version at least. It's so marvelous, and also features so many of the characters who appear as photographers or subjects or muses in the gallery itself. So I thought that it was a nice a work to include that really brought everything together in conversation, and in a really loving and fun and exhilarating way. This is Bobby, a collaboration he made with Geraldine Visco at the other side. As you can tell, the show is not just incorporating photography, but trying to expand kind of celebrated histories of photography in Boston, specifically those around queerness, and artists who are using their experiences of nightlife and sex as raw material for their art. So I'm incorporating video, as you just saw, but also textile and ceramics. This is a needlepoint work that Avram Finkelstein made. He also studied at the SMFA, mainly ceramics. And he made this work based on a photograph by Nan Golden of their friend B, who appears actually in the video. She's one of the stars. She was a trans woman and one of Nan Golden's most famous muses. Here's a ceramic portrait that Avram made of Kenny, who also performed in Ivy in drag as Ivy in the mid-70s, early to mid-70s, and we see some postcards actually of Nan Golden's earliest photography shows. As probably all of you know, Nan Golden is probably one of the most influential and powerful photographers in the world. And she got her start photographing the drag queens and trans women at the other side, which is a bar in Bay Village. It was across the street from Jack's, which still exists, and actually had the same owner. So this was what I'm trying to do is contextualize these histories of photography that many of us know very, very well, but to introduce new characters, to expand narratives, to generate new stories about this particular cultural milieu. Wonderful photograph by Shelburne Derber, and in the middle we actually see Kenny Angelico, who is the same person as Ivy, but outside of drag. This is a photograph by Alan Frame, which I absolutely adore. He studied at Harvard and was a close friend of Nan Golden's. This is a portrait he made, kind of playful portrait of his boyfriend's roommate, Kevin, dressing up in drag. And we see a photograph of this person framed on a table. And in the exhibition, actually, I have those two photographs together. And again, just showing the narrative quality that can emerge through photography as a site of experimentation and playing with identities. And this work is actually also made by Avram Finkelstein, but it is more recent and speaking to, it's actually in dialogue with so many of the works, but a reconfiguration of a photograph that is digitally manipulated, or several photographs actually of various friends, and clearly kind of based on the needlepoint of B that I showed you before. And you see both of these works together here. Jason Byron Gavon is a photographer who I'm really delighted is participating in his show. He photographed many of the people when the other side closed in 1976. People flocked, a lot of the misfits and trans women and drag queens and scare queens and hustlers and Johns and wannabes and everyone flocked to Together, or Togethers as Jason calls it, which was on Boylston Street. It was the former home of the Sugar Shack, which was a Black nightclub that was quite famous. And so actually, I don't have a close-up, but we see Sylvia Sidney in the image to the far left outside of drag with Colette Abate, who was one of Jason's most beloved friends during this period, as well as one of his muses. This is the hero image on our website, and a photograph that I absolutely adore, some showgirls from Togethers. So one development that I'm interested in tracing in the exhibition is the ways in which, we see glam rock and disco segueing to punk, and the ways in which punk really reconfigured a lot of these social worlds. And so here I have a sequence of images by Gail Thacker, as well as in the middle, the black and white image, which I don't have a close-up of, is by Fill and Flash, and all of them are taken on the same night at Spit, or Spits as Gail likes to call it, which was on Lansdowne Street in the Fenway, which is where a lot of punk clubs were existing, spaces where there was a lot of experimentation and combining different forms of art from dance and fashion and film and so many other things. This is actually a fashion show that was in which the participants are mainly nude, and we see them getting ready to go out. Then the performance itself, people wearing body paint, and then at the end of the night, we see Gail and Linnell in each other's arms, as well as Jack Salafia washing off the body paint. This is Lisa Knox and Pat Hearn getting ready. Mark Morris Rowe was Gail's closest friend. Later on, after he died, he became probably one of the most famous photographers of this period in New York City, though. The second part of the exhibition, as I said, is about the gay press, and I became so obsessed with this idea of going out was being synonymous with coming out and really just going outside, whether it was cruising in the fens or going to somewhere or to Playland. I think this was something that really resonated with me as so many of us were contending with COVID-19 and the pandemic, and that's really the period in which so many of these ideas were incubating for me, in which I deepened my research. I am thrilled to shine light on how photographers were contributing to gay community news, as well as Boston Gay Review in this vitrine. This is showcasing the work of Angela Russo, who was a nightlife photographer and photographed other things for GCN in the mid-70s. A terrific photograph taken at Club Max for a GCN benefit. And this is from Boston Gay Review, which and featuring some cultural criticism, photo criticism actually, by Sal Farinella, who is involved in Good Gay Poets. And here we also have the work of Hat Paul. In this vitrine, I bring together two different people who actually I think have, or I know Craig and Sherry have been important to the history project over its trajectory. Craig Bailey is a photographer. Much of his work has really focused on the Black queer experience in Boston since the 1990s. He contributed to South End News, and as well as many other publications, and took a lot of publicity photographs for the Theater Offensive, which, as you probably know, is the LGBTQ theater organization that was founded in the early 90s, I think. Now it's more youth oriented. He also he collaborated on a gorgeous safer sex guide, Color Me Healthy, in collaboration with Fenway Community Health Center. And we have images of it, some of these images, as well as how they appear in the guide itself here. It really geared toward men of color. This is one of his publicity photos for Muses, which is one of it was the first all Black lesbian production. Well, that's not fully true, but it was as far as how it was produced and directed, it was and written, it was the first Black lesbian theatrical production, at least in New England, I'm pretty positive. And Sherry Edwards was highly involved in the worlds of punk and publishing and xerography, a really wonderful intersection. She contributed some work to Bad Attitude, which originated as an insert in Fag Rag, and she developed this amazing process of, she calls them electrographs, and we see them here, in which she as someone highly engaged in debates surrounding feminism and pornography, excuse me, she wanted to make a type of image that was non-oppressive, an erotic lesbian image that was non-oppressive, and using a more abstract language to speak about lesbian sexuality and eroticism. And essentially, she made a video of herself having sex with a lover or lovers. And then from that, she created this convoluted process of, well, she created a still image and then kind of played with a Xerox machine. This was in the late 70s. And she was really an expert on retooling them in ways that were unusual. And the final result of what she was able to engineer, these brilliantly colored images that are really so special. And it's a type of art making that is so exceptional. As I study, queer art in a whole host of contexts, and the type of work that Sherry was doing was so sophisticated and special, and it's so cool that it developed out of the context of queer Boston. She was the art editor of Gay Community News in the early 80s, and a lot of her work was committed to AIDS activism too in the later part of the decade. Finally, this is the section in which I foreground histories of the vernacular and the community archive. And you see how I'm interested in photography and the ways in which it plays an important role in preserving queer history and trans history, even at the most existential of times. This is actually a series of photographs. You can see all four of them here. It's not quite a series. They were taken by Nick DeWolf, who was an engineer and an entrepreneur living in Beacon Hill, who didn't have a photographic education, but took photos of essentially everything in his community. He wasn't queer, but it's wonderful that he was attentive to different queer events that were gay and lesbian events that were happening in his neighborhood, especially at Charles Street Meeting House, which was an epicenter for a lot of organizing, not just gay, also within the civil rights movement. It was a place that was very friendly to various forms of activism, and actually Gay Community News, as you might know, originated there. Their first offices were at Charles Street Meeting House. And so we had the first gay liberation dance series of them at Charles Street Meeting House, and they're significant. Actually, I think Joan might be able to speak better in greater depth on their significance. But one reason they were outside of a gay bar, and so that was unusual to have a public event where gay people and lesbians could come together and celebrate in a space that wasn't just nightlife oriented. So you can kind of see here that we have some hippies. They're not exactly the cool club kids that appear in Nan Goldin's photographs, for instance, but they really enrich our understandings of gay and lesbian history in Boston in this period. Also, here we have some what you can see if you look closely is a very small fraction of the Jim McGrath archive. He was a bartender at Playland, which was a bar in the combat zone. It has a very long history, and it was actually the inspiration for the film that Joan and I will be in conversation about with Mateus Cabral later this month at Tufts University Art Galleries. Jim worked as a bartender there for, I think, 30 or 40 years, and he actually did an oral history with the theater project, which is great, though it's a little bit hard to hear. And I think he tragically died very recently. But his photographs are really special. I know that he was really key to creating the program of festivities and the holiday decorations. For example, we see the 4th of July and Halloween and Christmas, just the ways in which gay bar atmospheres were utterly transformed by each holiday. People put so much thought into this. And I love how we just see, this progression of, different vignettes of people and the ways in which the space, um, changes over the years, even just in terms of the color, and the quality of the images changing. Clayland was also Christian Walker's favorite bar, and he photographed it here. And in the middle, we see Annie, the notoriously disgruntled barmaid, as well as uh, all the it must have been for a holiday, as has been pointed out to me, given all the tinsel and chaos that we see behind the bar itself. And finally, we have this utterly important archive by Pat Gozemba, who is a name probably very familiar to you, an important professor and scholar and activist within Greater Boston and the North Shore, has been based in Salem since at least the 60s. And she took these photographs. She's a self-taught photographer, and was actually one of the founders of the History Project with other scholars and archivists and activists and community members. And she noticed in the early 80s, as someone who, was studying lesbian history and gay history, that there weren't a lot of images, there wasn't a lot of documentation and visual documentation of working class lesbians within New England and beyond New England. And so she knew about Fran's Place, which was in Lynn, Massachusetts. She'd been there. It was formerly a bar called the Lighthouse going back to the 1950s. And she's done a lot of research on this with some other important scholars over the decades. And anyways, there was a reunion of the Lighthouse in 1983, and she went there with her camera and took these beautiful images of middle-aged women of all sorts of subject positions having a nice time. And she's been able to identify a lot of these people too. So yes, here's one image. It's one of my favorites. So that's what I prepared. And I'm really keen to hear your thoughts and questions, and grateful for this opportunity to share this research and exhibition. I think that seeing it in person will really give you a stronger sense of, these histories, of course, but it's great that you're able to experience it on your computers too. Oh, I have to stop share, right? Did you just do that? Okay.
I made it do it. But I want to say first, thank you so much for walking us through the exhibit. I was able to attend the opening, and it's very amazing. It's a really wonderful exhibit. If you are in the Boston area, I highly suggest going to see it in person. Especially, well, I'm always saying, especially in these trying times, and I feel like it's been a decade of trying times now. But to see the queer community presented so visibly, and to see these spaces that were, that kind of public-private liminal community space up in an art gallery is just very, very powerful. And so it's very exciting. And there have been a bunch of amazing reviews of the exhibit as well. So congratulations, Jackson. And thank you for all of your work. I've come up with some questions. If folks have questions for Jackson, or want to share anything, feel free to put them in the chat or do the hand raise function. I can call on you. And I don't want to, well, I do. I'm going to blow up her spot. Pat Gozemba is here. Hi, Pat.
Oh, great.
So, but I suppose before I get to the questions, you had mentioned the dances at Charles Street Meeting House. And Jackson and I were talking about this the other day about how at the time, technically, it was illegal for same-sex dancing to happen in Boston. There's a great recollection written by John Kuiper, who's also in this audience. And so
Wow.
here it's up on our digital collections, talking about, how he had never seen same-sex dancing outside of the murky confines of the other side. Um, According to my research, it seems like the same-sex dancing prohibition is still in the books, although it would be unenforceable at this time. So that's kind of that. Jackson, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about um, the kind of trajectory of your work. You intertwine sort of queer community history into this study of art history. Um, I'm actually really interested in asking you about John O'Reilly and James Tellin, but that's not this exhibit. So if you could just share with us, how did you get into this? How did you become interested?
Hmm. Thank you for that question and for all these generous thoughts and observations. I have always been really interested in queer visual culture, and being from the Boston area, of course, this is near to my heart. But I think that there's, a lot of interest in the so-called Boston School, which I don't think I really went into in this overview, strangely. But within art history, there's this idea that there was a Boston School. It's a joke. It's something that Nan Golden coined in the mid 90s. This idea, again, of artists, photographers in particular, um, moving toward depicting really raw forms of intimacy and friendship and sex in photography. And this became a kind of idiom of representation in the 70s and 80s. And people, not just Nan Golden, but Mark Morrisroe and um, um, David Armstrong and Shelburne Thurber and there are a few different people who become kind of recognized for their important contributions to photography, but also have been historicized in ways that are very narrow, I think, within the field of art history, which is what my academic training is in. And so I've always been fascinated by how Nan Golden, as a brilliant photographer, as someone who started off, you know, taking photos in Boston, like hundreds of other people, why is her work never cross-hatched with a consideration of what was actually going on in Boston at the time? Yes, we see the other side, but there's always this idea that Boston was a really homophobic and backward city, which, with puritanical roots, and there are these, the very small group of queer people finding each other and making art. And I have always actually felt uncomfortable with this narrative because there's so many other narratives of queer life in Boston and also so many other photographers. And so I think in around 2019, I wanted to study this a bit further because I know a lot about Boston's and New England's queer history. Um, this has been a general research interest of mine, and Michael Bronski is a friend, and over several years I've been privileged to just absorb a lot of information from him, and the layers of work that have gone into gay publishing, whether it was Fag or Gay Community News or Bad Attitude. These histories are so expansive. So for me, it's felt like a really important political project to think about photography um, beyond just a narrow art history way, and to introduce more characters, to tell more stories that are more inclusive, but also a little bit more creative. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And then I think COVID-19 really made these histories feel more immediate to me. I was wanting to think about gay liberation and the ways in which, as I said, going out and being in public um, was so crucial to that. And during COVID, we weren't really able to go out. And so I was contemplating those ramifications. And through that, I came to Christian Walker, which was also through Michael Bronski, and I ended up writing this essay called Against Our Vanishing, which was reconsidering the importance of photography and its contemporary significance through local histories of nightlife and sex. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's kind of an ongoing interest of mine. I'm still not bored by these histories, despite having spent a lot of time thinking about them and thinking about them with a marvelous community of people. I think for me, it's become a way of reaching out to community. A lot of scholarships kind of about isolating yourself and like, you know, being with your books and, you know, alone. But for me, this has been such a social and joyful process of connecting with other people, and especially living artists and photographers and activists who are still in our community, and we're so grateful that they are.
Thank you. And there's actually a question from Cole in the chat that I think is a really good follow-up to this idea of finding community and connecting with community. And Cole is asking about the phenomenon of nostalgia and our relationship to the past. And Cole says, I don't know how to ask this, but what do you think about this phenomenon? It's like we remember things we didn't experience and sometimes try to recreate it in a different context. Will we remember 21st century gay nightlife with so much care and emotion? Um,
Mhm.
I think this connects really interestingly, because I think you and I we're both millennials, right? Um, Somewhere in there. And I'm a member of some of these Facebook groups that you talked about, these communities that have sprung up, particularly around bars. And they're bars that I never went to, but it's a way that I've connected with other community members and sometimes have said, oh yeah, we have that in the archives, or you should come talk to us if you're interested, that sort of thing. So yeah, what do you think about, I mean, 21st century nightlife, but also about this kind of queer nostalgia that happens?
Mhm. I agree. I think that there is a lot of nostalgia. Um, I think that the 70s in particular are very appealing for so many reasons when it comes to queer life and aesthetics and community. It's crucially the decade, you know, where it was before the advent of HIV/AIDS, which totally reconfigured queer life in the 1980s and beyond. It's also before the advent of things like VHS. In Boston, for example, even the combat zone where the Pilgrim Theater was, that was totally transformed with various forms of gentrification and urban renewal, and the expansion of Tufts University New England Medical Center, and all of a sudden this very vibrant place where a lot of queer and trans people flocked for work or for pleasure, that was gone. And there are these ecosystems um, of queer life that really traverse the decades and that transform our sense of space. I think that queer nightlife today looks very different, in part because we're in a different political place where there's a lot of queer visibility, and fortunately, places like Boston are a lot safer for queer people and trans people in general than in other places. But of course, that's not true across the board. Um, but there's a dearth of queer social spaces today. Um, there are some bars. I'm really uh, delighted and honored to collaborate with Boudoir, which is a queer nightlife and DJ collective, actually on Man Ray on March 21st, will be, which is the residency that they usually have, will be creating a night that is inspired by As the World Burns, and the kind of video and nightlife aesthetics that are contained there. And I've worked with them before, but I think it's important to bear in mind that nightlife isn't dead. And that's a question that I've been getting from a lot of people. And there are still ways to kind of breathe new life into these histories and to enrich our experiences of going out and connecting with each other.
That's the question I get the most from, usually from students, but sometimes from journalists, is what happened to all the gay bars? Why aren't there more gay bars left? It's like they are there, but the world is different. For as much as we're dealing with, I think, similar themes of oppression and homophobia and transphobia in 2024, it's a totally different world than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Let's see. Sorry, I took an idea. Okay. Cole is saying not in Chicago. Chicago has a neighborhood, but this is a completely different conversation that we could have about Boston's geography and whether or not it is a place where communities can create a large space for themselves. I feel like there are still pockets here across the greater Boston area for all kinds of communities, not just queer and trans people. I don't want to overshadow the question and answer session, although I do have more questions. So if folks, please feel free to, hit the hand raise button if you would like to ask Jackson a question or bring something up, or feel free to use the chat and I'm happy to read things out. And I'll give folks a moment of Zoom pause. Oh, Maida.
Yeah, I'll raise one, although I was rarely there. And maybe it didn't fit into your exact theme of sex and eroticism, but I hear that there was plenty of it. GCN had plenty of nightlife. Thursday night, layout night, you can ask Sherry Edwards about that because she was an art director. And Friday night fold and stuff was, for people who didn't want to go to the bars, that was the place people were. And those would go very late, and plenty of people made lots of sexual connections from what I've heard. So I'm wondering if anybody has photos from that. I see John smiling there. I'm amazed Bronski didn't point you in that direction, actually. Did it come up?
Yes, it has come up, and I don't think I used any of those photographs in my exhibition, but I have presented on them. Northeastern University has a lot of terrific photos of people working at GCN and volunteering for GCN, as well as various nightlife events, such as the Angela Russo photos that I showed you. So yes, I did include the photos by Angela Russo, which were published in GCN, but there are also many other photos of people just having fun at GCN as a social and sexual space. I'm sure that the theater project also has material that's related to this, but Joan can comment more on that.
Yeah, well,
I'm
that's
really,
oh,
I'm
go
really
ahead,
glad.
Maida.
I'm really glad to hear that because in all my collection of photos and stuff from my years at GCN and stuff, I only have one of people in the office really. That's it. So I was wondering if there were any others. So that's very good to hear. Is that something you'd like? I'd go to the archive at Northeastern or something to see, or how do you get to see them?
I think that they're presently closed to in-person research. There will be reopening soon. Molly Brown and Jordana Mczani, I don't know how to say her last name, McGon
McCagney.
McCagney,
I've
thank you.
known Jordana for a decade, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly.
Okay.
So,
They're
Jordana, if you
both
see this, my apologies.
they're both really wonderful and intelligent interlocutors and actually a lot of this material that I was able to access it during COVID because I had a fellowship in part through Northeastern, and they were able to go in and scan it for me, which was really sweet. So there's actually a lot of digitized material. This particular collection, a lot of the visual collection are already digitized.
Does that mean that it's online or what?
A
I
lot
saw
of
Joan put
a lot of
something
it
up.
is, I think at the time they had to we transfer it to me individually, but they're really good about putting things online and making them public to communities.
That's great. Thanks so much for letting me know. And I
Also, the
really enjoyed, I
Society
really
of Gay
enjoyed your
Community
show.
News is online. It's open access and almost all of the issues of GCN are in the Northeastern collection and have been fully scanned. So you can actually, and they're searchable. So you can go in and search your name. It's like the most important resource for LGBTQ history in the United States in this particular field. So it's amazing. I really encourage all of you to utilize it as much as you can.
Yeah, I've been putting links in the chat. We actually have an intern who's just wrapped up, Marco Lanier, who will be presenting at the New England Archivist Conference next week or the week after, who digitized a lot of photos from GCN and adds them to our online repository as well. So if you've looked at it before, there's new stuff up now, and he's working on an exhibit as well. A digital exhibit, but another way to explore some of the visual culture and history of GCN and the issues it covered, especially in light of now it's the 51st anniversary, but after our celebration of 50 years of GCN last year. Yeah, and the GCN online, it really is amazing. They're available at Northeastern, the Internet Archive. You can also search if that's easier to access. And it's sort of, you can definitely put your own name in and find all of the things you said however many years ago, which I find both very interesting and probably personally horrifying. But oh, Tony, go right ahead.
Thank you. Jackson, thank you so much. This is really, really great. And I'm going to see the show on the exhibits on Saturday, so I cannot wait to go see them. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that when you were in New York, you got the chance to meet somebody who was one of the subjects in one of the photographs. And I wondered if that happened with other people, and whether or not it did you learn anything new or different with your interaction with that person?
So we still need to interview this particular person, but what I loved about the openings, as well as public programs, both in New York and here, is that a lot of people, particularly people who we hadn't yet had the opportunity to connect with because we didn't even know they existed or were still alive, found out about the shows, I don't know how, and showed up. And so, for example, there's a photograph that Christian Walker took in that Fort Hill Faggots couple series. I wish I included it in the PowerPoint, but you'll see it in person soon. And it's Richard McDougall and his then boyfriend, whose name I'm forgetting. And Richard McDougall, both of them were part of Fort Hill Faggots. We'd actually been in touch with Richard because he kindly loaned us one of the photographs in the Christian Walker show. And both he and his ex showed up, and they posed in the same, like I almost get like teary-eyed, like thinking about it. They posed in the same formation as they did in the early 80s in Fort Hill. And it's just like, so beautiful that art and exhibitions can bring people together in that capacity through, this intergenerational dialogue. And yeah, it's really special. So that's just one example, but there are a lot of other people, and people too from the Atlanta years, people who knew Christian Walker at that point, who've been getting in touch and who've been so supportive of the exhibition, coming to Boston and trying to bring it to Atlanta too.
Questions? Oh, Pat.
Hi, Joan. Hi, Jackson. Thanks so much for the show. And this was great. I'm sorry that I can't see the whole exhibit in person, but I just wanted to make one comment about the photographs that you selected that I shot at Fran's place, and mention that one of the big things, and I know when you said, well, there's a lot of these middle-aged women in these photos, and it's like it was really kind of shocking for me to hear, oh, 40 years ago, I was a middle-aged woman shooting middle-aged women in a bar. That is really, really kind of a mind twister for a moment. But I just wanted to emphasize one of the things that I was aiming at by doing those photographs, and that the History Project was aiming at, and there were many of us who attended that particular reunion that is captured in those photos, and that is that there were very few working class women in any of the research projects that the History Project had been involved in, up until 1983, 84, which was the time we went to this bar. I mean, so that was really our goal, and from that, an enormously big interest in bar culture started to develop, and I'm really glad that that I, and later Marilyn Humphreys, who is the photographer in our friendship network, the photographs that she did were also of the bar, and I hope that in the future that we will preserve what the vestiges are of the bars are now. So that, because I think that many people going into bars now, gay bars now, may not be thinking, oh, it's not important to take these pictures, or may not even be allowed to do those pictures. And I want to encourage people to take photos, younger people especially, to take photos of those particular sites. I know that earlier I saw him, I don't know if he's still here, Jim Moser from Lynn, who is with whom I'm working on a project called Through a Rainbow Lens about LGBTQ plus history in Lynn, Massachusetts, and that's where Fran's place was, and we'll be using some of these photos from Fran's as well. But it's a totally rich history, and to bring forward the history of Fran's brings forward a whole history of a section of the city in Lynn. In fact, I was reading through some of the transcripts of interviews that Janet Kahn, who is also a member of the History Project, and I did. And one of the things it's clear is that Fran's was a neighborhood bar as well as a gay bar. So I think it's interesting to notice in cities and towns outside of Boston that the gay bar wasn't necessarily just a gay bar. It was also a neighborhood bar and a place where lots of people hung out. Community centers, in a way. So thanks so much for all of your work, Jackson, and thank you, Joan, for shepherding this through as usual.
Thank you, Pat. I'm trying to find, so I put a link to the United Lynn Pride Through Rainbow Lens project in the chat. And so if you are from the area, they're doing oral histories, they're taking submissions of photos, and that project will eventually come to live in the History Project's digital archives as well. So please check that out. And I'm trying to find a free link to Pat and Janet Kahn's article about the lighthouse and working class lesbians, but I haven't been able to find it on demand. So we'll see about that for later. Yeah, so we are at 8 o'clock right now, and we usually like to end in a timely fashion. So I just want to say, Jackson, thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to Jackson and I will be talking with Matthias at the end of the month at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, or Tufts University Art Galleries at the School and Museum of Fine Arts. Academia always has such long titles, on the 28th. And yeah, I hope to see you there if you're in the Boston area. And I really hope you get a chance to go out and see the exhibit if you are local. It's really, really amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joan. It's been a pleasure. All right, have a nice night.
Have a good night, everyone.